Tonight I sat awake, holding my late husband's cane, waiting. By noon tomorrow they planned to drain every account I had, but my granddaughter slipped into my room, whispered the truth, and that was all I needed to prepare. I have lived in this house for 43 years, long enough that every creak in the floorboards answers me by name, long enough that I know exactly how the late afternoon light will crawl across the faded roses on the wallpaper before it dies. This house used to be loud with living. The piano in the front room stood open like a mouth ready to sing, its keys forever smudged by small sticky fingers. My children, Stellan and Marble, would crowd around their father, while Amos coaxed lullabies from those yellowed ivories, and I would scold them for pressing too close, though secretly the tangle of their bodies against his made my heart swell so large I thought it might break the ribs that caged it. Those days slid past like warm water through open hands. I never felt them leaving until the silence moved in and made itself at home. Now I rise before the sun has decided whether to bother with the day. I wipe the kitchen counters, though no one has cooked here but me in years. I polish the brass handles until they gleam like the lies my children tell themselves. I water the rosemary Amos planted along the back fence, running my fingers through its sharp, faithful needles and breathing the scent that still carries his name. Some mornings I pause on the porch steps, half expecting to hear that low, unfinished hum of his drifting from the kitchen window. The silence always corrects me, gentle and brutal at once. Lately the silence has grown teeth. Stellan and Marble have taken to visiting separately, never together, always with the same careful smiles that never reach their eyes. They ask if I need anything: milk, bread, a new kettle, as though I am already half gone and drifting. Their gazes wander while they speak, across the photographs lining the mantel, over the locked drawer by the sideboard, toward the small cabinet where I keep the papers that prove I still own myself. Last Tuesday, Stellan leaned against my counter, swirling the dregs of coffee he hadn't tasted, and asked, too casually, whether I had thought any more about the will. He tried to wrap the question in tenderness, but tenderness from him has grown brittle as dead leaves. 2 days later, Marble arrived with a basket of muffins still wearing the bakery sticker. She patted my hand the way you soothe a fretful toddler and murmured that it would be so much easier if they helped manage things. I nodded because nodding is simpler than war, but inside me something small and bright flared defiance, perhaps, or memory. I have managed this life since before either of them drew breath. That night I locked my bedroom door, opened the safe, and counted every folder with fingers that would not stop trembling until the last one was accounted for. On the morning I turned 68, I woke long before dawn and sat at the kitchen table listening to the house breathe around me. I set out my mother's porcelain teacups in perfect rows, folded the linen napkins into swans the way she taught me when I was 9, and baked a lemon butter cake whose scent filled every room like a plea. I told myself this year might be different. By noon, the cake sat cooling under a glass dome, and 3 places waited at the dining table, though I knew, even as I lit the candles, that no one was coming. The candles guttered in the draft, reminding me how easily a flame can be snuffed. At 4 o'clock, Leora finally appeared, hair still tied with the ribbon from school, backpack dragging behind her like an anchor. She didn't look up from her phone when she came in. "Mom's working late," she said to the screen. "Uncle Stellan had an appointment." I cut her a thick slice of cake anyway and set it on a plate painted with forget-me-nots. She held it without tasting, thumbs flying across glass. I poured tea that steamed between us like a question neither of us wanted to ask. Then she set the phone down and looked at me. Really looked, and her young face folded with something between guilt and greed. "Grandma," she began, voice barely louder than the ticking clock, "do you, have a lot of money in your accounts?" The words struck me so hard I felt them in my bones. I kept my face still only by the grace of 68 years of practice. "Why would you ask me that, darling?" She flushed crimson. Mom said never mind. She left soon after, cake untouched, and the house folded itself around the emptiness she left behind. That night sleep refused me. I lay rigid beneath quilts stitched by hands now decades in the ground, listening to the radiator clank its lonely song. Leora's question lodged beneath my ribs like a fishhook. Long after midnight I rose, pulled on my robe, and walked the hallway that suddenly felt foreign. When had these walls stopped feeling like shelter? I was about to retreat when I heard it. The soft scrape of the sideboard drawer easing open. I stepped into the shadows and saw her. My granddaughter crouched like a thief, the glow of her phone painting her tear-streaked face ghostly blue. Leora. She jumped so violently the phone nearly slipped from her fingers. For a moment she could not speak. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish drowning in air. Then the words spilled. "I'm sorry. I wasn't going to take anything, I swear. I had to see. She was shaking. I knelt, old knees protesting, and took the phone from her cold hands. What is it, sweetheart? They're going to take you to the bank tomorrow, she whispered. At noon. Mom and Uncle Stellan. They said if you got upset, they'd tell you it was for your own good. They said you'd sign because you're forgetful. Her voice cracked on the word they had used as a weapon. They don't think you'll remember. But I heard them. I thought you should know. The floor tilted beneath me. I sank onto the bench and pulled her into my arms. She smelled of school corridors and vanilla shampoo and terror. I held her while the truth poured its ice water through my veins, and in that moment something ancient woke inside me, something that had been sleeping since the day I first held my own newborns and promised the universe I would protect them from everything. When she slipped out into the night, I did not go back to bed. I sat in the entryway with my hand on the drawer she had opened, feeling the house settle around me like a conspirator. At midnight the clock chimed, and I stood legs unsteady, heart astonishingly clear, and walked to the piano. The bench creaked the way it always has. I lifted the cushion and reached into the hollow space beneath where Amos had hidden the lockbox the year he got sick. Some things, he'd said, pressing the key into my palm, should stay closer than any safe. My fingers found cool metal. I carried the box to the kitchen table and opened it under the single lamp. Inside lay everything they wanted. Bank records, the deed to this house, insurance papers thick with the ink of our joined lives. I closed the lid, and at dawn I brewed coffee strong enough to scald and called Celine Chapin. She arrived that afternoon while the light was still gold and forgiving. We sat at the table, and I signed papers that turned my name into armor. When she left, every account rested inside an irrevocable trust. Every asset ringed with legal fire. I carried the wilted birthday flowers to the trash and felt something loosen in my chest, like a fist I had not known was clenched. They came at 2:00 sharp, pulling into the drive as if on cue. Stellan stepped out first, smoothing his jacket the way he used to smooth excuses when he was 10. Marbell followed, clutching a casserole wrapped in a tea towel, smiling the smile she once used to beg for one more story. I waited by the dining table with the lockbox in plain sight. Mom, Stellan began, voice dripping honey. We brought lunch. Marble set the dish down, and her eyes flicked to the box and away again. You've been on our minds. I'm quite comfortable, I said. Stellan cleared his throat. About the bank we thought today would be best. Just to get everything taken care of. You haven't been feeling your best. Marble nodded, eyes soft with rehearsed concern. It's about protecting you, Mom, so you don't have to worry. I looked at them, at the children I had carried beneath my heart, whose fevers I had cooled with my own hands, whose nightmares I had banished with lullabies, and felt the past and present collide until something inside me shattered quietly. I've already spoken to Celine, I said. Everything is in a trust now. No one else will manage it. 5 ticks of the clock in perfect silence. Stellan's mouth opened, closed. Mom. You don't need to make this difficult. I'm not, I said. I'm making it impossible. Marbell looked at her hands. Stellan's jaw worked soundlessly. I closed the lockbox with a soft, final click. They left without the casserole. That night I did not sleep. I sat in the dark dining room with Amos's cane across my knees and waited. At 2:37 the kitchen door eased open. Stellan stepped inside without a word and went straight to the cabinet that no longer held what he wanted. I watched his silhouette search, growing frantic. When his shoulders slumped in defeat, I reached over and turned on the lamp. Looking for something? He spun, face blotched red and white. Mom, I thought I heard. At 2:30 in the morning. I lifted my phone so he could see the glowing timer. Celine is listening. The fight drained out of him like water through a sieve. He tried excuses, then anger, then something that might have been shame. I let none of them land. This is my house, I said. That money is mine. You will never again come here uninvited. He left with the door closing behind him like the period at the end of a sentence neither of us had wanted to write. The days after were impossibly quiet. No calls, no cars in the drive, no more careful smiles. I swept floors that did not need sweeping. I watered rosemary that thrived on neglect. Some afternoons I stood at the window, half expecting them to appear with apologies I was no longer sure I wanted to hear. It was Leora who came first. She stood on the porch, clutching her backpack straps, until her knuckles went white. I'm sorry, she whispered before I could speak. I didn't know they'd really... I took her hand, small, bird-bone, trembling, and led her inside. I poured milk the way I did when she was 5 and set out butter cookies dusted with sugar. We sat in silence, thick enough to touch. Spring arrived early that year. One morning I woke to find hyacinths pushing defiant heads through the cold earth, pale blue and violet, reckless with color. I stood at the window holding coffee that steamed against the glass and felt something inside me unclench for the first time in years. I joined the piano circle at the library on Tuesdays. I taught small, hesitant fingers to find middle C and watched their faces light when the note rang true. In the afternoons, I knelt in the dirt beside Amos's roses, thinning weeds and speaking to him the way I used to speak to the children when they were small softly, as though the world might overhear and mock tenderness. One evening, Leora came carrying a paper bag of sweet rolls she had saved from lunch. She hovered in the doorway until I smiled, then slipped inside and watched me pour tea with the caution of someone crossing thin ice. "Grandma," she said after a long time, "you look different." I set the teapot down. "How so?" "You look happy," she whispered, as if happiness were a secret too bright to say aloud. I touched her cheek, brushing away a crumb. "I think I am." The truth of it startled us both. I had believed the best parts of my life were behind me, that all that remained was to shrink politely until I fit whatever space they decided to leave me. But standing in my own kitchen with rosemary scent drifting through the open window and the piano waiting patiently in the next room, I understood I had chosen something else. I had chosen to belong, at last and fiercely, to myself.